Happiness is not what you get, but what you give. That's a lesson that can take a lifetime to learn. Today I'd like to tell you the story about my grandfather and how he would come to learn this lesson. Opa was born in Switzerland in 1924, the eldest son of a blacksmith, one of 7 children. He was born in the Depression, so times were tough, money was hard to come by. And on top of it, Opa was born a sickly child. In fact, at one point as an infant, he was so sick that his family was worried he wouldn't make it. They even had last rites administered to him. But he would pull through, as he would throughout his life. Complications also required multiple surgeries on his nose, and this was something that the kids would tease him about, so he was also bullied. Opa was 15 when World War II started. His father was called away to serve in the Swiss military, and as the eldest son, a lot of responsibilities were put onto his young shoulders. Effectively, he was the father figure of the household. The meager wages that his father was able to send back home weren't enough to cover all the family's needs. So they had to find ways to make do, even relying on food ration coupons like this to get by. And it was during this time that Opa started his apprenticeship. And he decided he would follow his father's footsteps and also become a blacksmith. It was hard work, hot in the furnaces. You know, the melting point of iron is 1,538 degrees Celsius. So you can imagine what it was like to work around those furnaces all day, every day. But Opa worked hard, and soon he would become a master blacksmith. And this, literally, was his masterpiece. He was so proud of it. He had to craft this in order to become a master. And it was something he was so proud of, he kept it in his home his whole life. I have it in my office now. It was also dangerous work. He would lose part of his finger in an accident in the foundry. My brother and I, when we were kids, we were a little bit naughty. And when we were, my grandfather would reprimand us and shake his little finger at us. And of course, being the naughty kids that we were, we would shake our fingers back at him. It was a visible scar from the forge to match the invisible scars from the forge of life. But there were also happy moments. He would meet a warm and caring woman, my grandmother. They would marry and start a family, and pretty soon they had 4 children. That's my mother, the little girl with the black hair and the black sweater on the couch. But money was still tight. And it was around this time that Opa, together with his brothers and his father, decided they would try to break out of their economic troubles and go out on their own. And they decided they would start their own foundry. They put everything they could into it. And they tried hard, but it failed. This put even more pressure on the family. It would take Opa years to pay back the debts. Of course, during this time, Switzerland was starting to prosper. And I could imagine my grandfather seeing his friends and neighbors and others around him starting to do better and better, getting into better homes, taking vacations, getting cars. And I imagine this was something that ate away at him, the injustice of it. Others doing so well and him continuing to work so hard every day in that hot foundry. He would ride to work every day on his bicycle and sometimes the train. And one day he'd had enough. And he decided that he also wanted to show that he was successful and important. And so without even consulting my grandmother, he decided that he also would buy a car. It was a used car, but still they couldn't afford it. And I think it was some sign from above, because as he was driving the car home on that first day, it broke down on him, and he had to take it to the repair shop, which cost even more money and put even more pressure on the family. My grandmother had to work at nights, cleaning offices to try to get extra money to make ends meet. My mother tells me that on some months things would get so tight towards the end of the month as the money ran out that they would have to go to a nearby farmer's orchard and collect apples on the ground so there would be food the next day. They were tough times, and the anger and frustration and bitterness sometimes would boil over. In fact, to be honest, as a child, as I remember Opa, we were scared of him. His loud, deep voice, and when he got angry, it was frightening. And eventually, this would lead to Opa's low point. His marriage failed. Rage, blame, embarrassment, shame, and bitterness, so much bitterness. It would take years, but gradually Opa started to pick up the pieces. And maybe it started just by trying to find ways to stay busy after retiring, but he started to volunteer in a vineyard, helping to prune and tie up the grape plants. He would visit his sister in her house in the Alps, and using his carpentry skills would help with renovations on the house, adding the extension, working on the barn. When he visited us in America, he would paint the house, doing lots of things to be of service. And gradually, over the years of helping others and losing himself, he began to soften. He could forgive himself, forgive others. Some fences could be mended, others not. He started to relish his role as grandfather and great-grandfather. He would come to have 14 great-grandchildren. With my own boys, he started to share his passion for collecting stamps. Every year he would send the newest issues that came from the Swiss Post Office. And then we started to get Christmas cards and birthday greetings. He would even teach himself how to use the computer so he could send them to us electronically. The one in the middle with the blue flower, he writes in there, that's a birthday greeting to me. He said that he spent a long time trying to figure out how to attach this image to the email. I can imagine how many hours he must have spent trying to get that right, working so hard on those relationships. This would be the last happy photo of Opa at home. He's holding the Christmas gift that we gave him last Christmas, a photo album of the great-grandkids from the US. His cough would get worse. He started having trouble sleeping throughout the night. His aging heart congested, water on his lungs, infections, fatigue, tired, so tired. My mother took him to the hospital on New Year's Eve. She remembers walking him down the stairs and taking him to the car and giving him just a small bag of toiletries and a change of clothes. And she remembers looking back up at his apartment and thinking, this is probably the last time. And also thinking that just like that, he's leaving behind all those material things that he worried so much about all those years. The next day, on New Year's Day, I drove down with my family down to Winterthur to visit him in the hospital. In fact, the same hospital that I was born in almost exactly 47 years before. We saw him in the hospital bed. He was exhausted, coming in and out of sleep, oxygen tubes around him to help him to breathe. My boys had school the next day, so soon it would come time for us to have to say goodbye. When we told Opa this, he gathered his strength and he took my sons by the hand, each one by one, and he looked them in the eye, and he said, "Thank you. Thank you for everything. I wish you a healthy life and a long and happy life." In that emotional moment, I was astounded to see this man who had lived 92 years, forged by so much pain and hardship, and emerge from that sadness and bitterness feeling only gratitude at the end. Such a transformation. This was his true masterpiece. I think these words from the Baha'i writings help to explain how this transformation came about. Through his helping others, he had started to become the cause of peace and well-being for others. In other words, happiness is not what you get, but what you give. Thank you.